Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, December 7, 1941, 7:48 a.m. This Sunday morning is ideal for the tropics. The air is warm and has a hibiscus and ocean scent. The sky is an incredible, perfect blue. The U.S. Pacific Fleet's Titans are dozing off around Ford Island's eastern shore. Battleship Row is a shallow, greasy body of water where 7 battleships are docked side by side. The USS Arizona, USS Tennessee, USS Maryland, and the USS West Virginia, a massive 33,000-ton sea fortress moored outboard of the Tennessee, are monuments of steel and haughtiness. Doris Dory Miller, 22, is gathering laundry deep within its steel belly. He works as a third-class mess attendant. In the magazine beneath the waterline, he has a battle station in case the ship ever goes to war. He's responsible for delivering ammo to the actual combatants. Miller is unaware of the fact that a Japanese B-5 torpedo bomber is setting up its run 4,000 yards out, screaming in at a height of only 40 feet over the water. A Type 91 torpedo, a 1,800-pound cylinder of steel, explosives, and brilliance, is slung beneath it. Dory Miller is not a shooter. He's not an officer in the Navy. He's not a strategist. He works as a cook on a ship. And in the next 10 minutes, he is about to do something so unthinkable and forbidden that it would completely alter naval history and destroy the U.S. Navy's core laws. You must first comprehend the man who orchestrated it in order to comprehend what transpired on that awful Sunday. Japan's combined fleet is commanded by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Yamamoto was a gambler who had a deeper understanding of America than the country itself. He was a Harvard student. He had served in Washington, D.C. as a naval attaché. He was also aware of the awful fact that Japan could not prevail in a protracted conflict. America's industrial strength was a sleeping behemoth that would destroy Japan if it ever woke up. Yamamoto's entire strategy was predicated on one crazy gamble: winning the war in a single morning rather than a protracted conflict. His plan, a 4,000-mile radio-silent voyage across the hostile North Pacific with a covert armada of 6 aircraft carriers, the WWII, to launch a surprise attack and destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet in one devastating blow, was so bold and suicidal that his own naval general staff called it insane. However, there was one enormous, unsolvable issue. The 4,000-mile trip wasn't it. It wasn't the danger of being found out. The water was the cause. This is where the Allies were let down by expert consensus. Hawaii's U.S. Naval Command was complacent. Why? Since the average depth of Pearl Harbor is only 40 feet. 40 feet. In order to plummet, stabilize, and arm itself, a torpedo dropped from an airplane in 1941 required at least 75 feet of water, frequently 100 feet. A typical torpedo would just plunge directly into the dirt in a 40-foot harbor. The experts said Pearl Harbor was impervious to torpedoes. Japanese brilliance had not been taken into consideration. Japanese engineers had been working covertly on an unsolvable problem for months. The Type 91, Revision 2 torpedo, was developed by them. It was a work of art on death. They used a cheap and easy approach, attaching tiny wooden fins to the tail. The torpedo's angle would be stabilized before these fins broke off upon impact with the sea. A second gyroscopic control system was added. The end product was a torpedo designed especially to destroy the ships in Pearl Harbor that could arm and run in as little as 33 feet of water. The Philippines and Malaya were the focus of the specialists in Washington and London. Battleship Row specialists were getting ready for a leisurely Sunday. The harbor was deemed safe by the experts. On December 7th, at 6 in the morning, the WWII transformed into the wind. 353 aircraft, including Zero fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers, rose off the decks. At the very moment those jets were taking off, the first wave of 183 aircraft turned their noses at the impossible target. Dory Miller was beginning to awaken. Serving breakfast in the officers' mess was his first task of the day, which began at 6 in the morning. You must first comprehend what Dory Miller was prohibited from doing in order to comprehend what he did. You have to comprehend the 1941 U.S. Navy. It was a white man's Navy with a severe systemic issue. The son of a sharecropper, Dory Miller was born in Waco, Texas in 1919. He was the outstanding fullback for his high school football team, standing 6 feet 3 inches and weighing 200 pounds. He was a strong, natural athlete. In 1939, he joined the U.S. Navy in search of a better life and to travel the world. But there was only one life for a black guy in 1939. Black sailors were not sailors in the U.S. Navy in 1942. Official, written policy prohibited them from being. They could only be rated as steward's mates or mess attendants. Their official responsibilities included cooking, dishwashing, serving meals to the white officers, cleaning their quarters, shining shoes, and making their beds. In a sense, they were floating valets. The law prohibited them from serving in combat roles, receiving firearm training, or working as navigators, mechanics, or gunners. To be clear, the U.S. Navy's experts, including the admirals and architects, believed that soldiers like Dory Miller lacked the intelligence, bravery, and skill necessary to engage in warfare. They were not allowed to carry a weapon. They were the men who actually prepared breakfast. Dory Miller was also known to the troops aboard the USS West Virginia. They knew him as the ship's heavyweight boxing champion, in addition to the calm man who brought them coffee. Every man who had challenged Miller in the vicious bare-knuckle smokers held on deck had lost. He was a warrior compelled to serve as a valet. He was a man with a lion's heart who was only permitted to gather laundry, a rifle wrapped in an apron. This individual was going to clash with Yamamoto's ambitious, unachievable scheme. Dory Miller is below decks at 7:48 a.m., according to some accounts. He was in the galley, while others claim he was in the laundry. It is irrelevant. What counts is that he is located deep within the ship, close to the waterline, 4 decks down, and encircled by steel. By all accounts, he is in a trap. The officer of the deck, a young ensign, notices something on the bridge above him. An aircraft. Odd. They don't own it. He takes a closer look. He recognizes the meatball, the red circle on the wing. He calls for the general alert. It's too late. Torpedo bombers have already arrived in their first wave. They're not elite bombers. They're approaching quickly low and suicidally near. The faces of the men on the decks are visible to the world's best pilots, the Japanese. They are deliberately targeting the USS West Virginia's battleships. The first klaxons sound. Confused, sailors are fleeing. A few remain in their pajamas. Time is of the essence. Time is of the essence. The alert is heard by Dory Miller. He makes his way to the ammunition stockpile located deep within the ship's belly, which serves as his battle station. 7:51 a.m. The first Type 91 torpedo, the one with the wooden fin slams into the port side of the West Virginia. The explosion is disastrous. It rips a 20-foot hole in the hull. The lower decks are immediately inundated with thousands of tons of filthy, oil-black port water. A second torpedo strikes before the ship has a chance to respond, followed by a third, fourth, and fifth. The sixth torpedo strikes. This one is not like the others. The steering is rendered inoperable when it collides with the ship's rudder. It's a fatal blow. At least 7 torpedoes have struck the USS West Virginia in less than 2 minutes. It's a death sentence. Dory Miller is in a pitch-black, shrieking horror down below. He's thrown against a bulkhead by the explosion's impact. The lights have gone out. The sound of a whole ocean rushing in is all that is present, along with darkness. His ship starts to lurch. It's going to capsize. It's dying. Men are stranded and drowning in the darkness all around him. He was rushing to an ammunition magazine that was already submerged. He no longer has an official combat station. He's in a steel tomb that is flooded, dark, and quickly toppling over. The professionals have passed away. The system is on fire. The prohibited cook is by himself. Dory Miller works as a chef. He is a survivor, but he is not an expert in damage control. He battles the ship's tilt and the surge of water as he makes his way through the completely dark tunnels. He is the most familiar of these passages. He moves through recollection and touch. He must ascend. He escapes into a nightmare on the main deck. The sky is dark, yet it is filled with airplanes rather than clouds. The air isn't actually air. It's a roaring 2,000-degree fire of aviation fuel, cordite, and smoke. The men are burning. Men are leaping off the decks. The water itself is ablaze. Just beyond them, the USS Arizona is docked and has just detonated. Its forward magazine has exploded with a 1 million-pound explosive. The 33,000-ton Arizona is lifted out of the water by the explosion, which creates a 500-foot-tall fireball. Dory Miller is knocked flat when the shockwave strikes West Virginia like the fist of God. He surveys his surroundings. Anarchy. The anti-aircraft guns on board are silent. Why? Why isn't anyone retaliating? The Japanese aircraft are now strafing the decks in addition to dropping torpedoes. The crew is being torn to shreds by their 7.7mm machine rifles. The men who were permitted to operate the weapons, the trained gunners, are slumped over and dead. 50 caliber mounts, their body torn to pieces. The commanders, musicians, and cooks are among the unskilled men fleeing for their lives. It's not a pop-pop-pop sound. The roar is so loud that it breaks bones. A round with a .50 caliber is incredible. It is about the size of a man's thumb. At about 3,000 feet per second, it leaves the barrel. Its purpose is to tear airplane engines from the sky. And 2 of them are in the hands of the ship's heavyweight boxing champion, Dory Miller. He has no idea how to lead a target. He's unaware of ballistic drop. He is instinctive. He's proficient in pointing. He then gestures toward the sky. He directs the barrels and unleashes wrath at the hordes of Japanese aircraft. The second wave's dive bombers now yelling down to complete what the torpedoes have begun. Unlike what the experts advise, he doesn't fire in brief, regulated bursts. He depresses the triggers to create a wall of fire, a stream of tracers, incendiaries, and slugs that pierce armor at a rate of 1,600 rounds per minute. He's not trying to aim. He's erasing. He's indicating to the Japanese aircraft, "You cannot pass," by drawing a line of steel in the sky. The men on the bridge, the other policemen, glance down and are astounded by what they see. The cook, the mess attendant, the man barred from fighting, is currently engaged in combat with the battleship's only and most potent anti-aircraft defense. The pilots from Japan also notice it. They are accustomed to undefended, silent targets. They are not accustomed to a ship that ought to be at the bottom of the sea, suddenly exploding from its deck with a single, ferocious, continuous volcano of .50 caliber fire. They start to stay out of his fire arc. The cook's gun, which he owns, has emerged as the most hazardous item on Battleship Row. For 15 minutes, he keeps shooting. His ship lists and sinks beneath his feet, while bombs burst all around him for 15 minutes in a row. He doesn't recoil. He keeps going. He doesn't flee for safety. He simply fires. Until the ammunition belts run out, he continues to fire. He doesn't stop shooting until the water lapping at the deck is so high that it could overwhelm him. Until the final aircraft in the sky is gone, he continues to fire. He continues blasting until his ship's moans and the hiss of fire are the only sounds remaining. Then there was quiet. The assault has ended. There is nothing in the sky. Dory Miller releases the handles. He has numb arms. His ears are ringing. Sweat, grease, and cordite are all on him. He surveys his surroundings. The conflict has ended. However, West Virginia's struggle for survival has just ended. The ship is complete. It has been hit by 7 torpedoes overall, more than any other ship that day. 2 enormous armor-piercing bombs have been required. The ship's port side is a damaged, flooded wreck. The ship's listing is 28 degrees. It is rapidly sinking. At last, the order to abandon ship is issued. This 33,000-ton stronghold, the West Virginia, is no longer a ship. It is a tomb, quickly sinking into the harbor's 40-foot deep mud. Because the USS Tennessee is somewhat upright due to its inboard mooring, it is not capsizing like the USS Oklahoma. After completing his unlawful act, Dory Miller is once again merely a sailor. He pulls injured individuals from the wreckage to aid his fellow sailors. He points bleeding, confused men in the direction of the lines being thrown from the Tennessee. He assists in extending a plank between the 2 enormous vessels. From their sinking battleship, he and the other survivors stroll onto the Tennessee's deck. He is among the final men to depart. He turns to look behind him. The ship where he had cooked, packaged, and gathered laundry is no longer his home. It is a half-submerged, blazing, burning hulk. It is surrounded by a lake of fire. 106 of his shipmates, including the man he attempted to save, Captain Mervyn Benham, who bled to death at his position on the bridge, are stranded inside the submerged lower decks and would never see the sun again. The vessel is sinking. The crew's being massacred. The professionals have failed. The system has fallen apart. Dory Miller perceives a problem at this very moment. Not the sinking ship or the planes. He notices the captain. Captain Benham's body is mutilated as he lies on the bridge. His gut has been torn open by a piece of shrapnel from the explosion in Arizona. He is still attempting to command his ship as he is dying. He won't go. Johnson, the ship's executive officer, rushes over to Miller. He sees no cook. All he sees is a man who weighs 200 pounds. A powerful man. "Aid me in moving the captain," he yells. The bridge is visible. Bullets abound in the air. Suicide is what this is. Dory Miller doesn't think twice. He rushes into the fire with Officer Johnson. They seize their dying captain. Benham is still conscious, but in excruciating pain. "Go away," he commands. "I'm finished." Miller disregards him. He is the heavyweight champion of the ship. The captain, whom he had most likely just served coffee to that morning, is gently lifted by him and carried out of the fire to a somewhat secure location. He has fulfilled his obligation. He has prevented the flames from destroying his captain. He had the option to cease. He wouldn't have been held accountable. He might have discovered a life raft. He had the option to jump overboard. He was only a cook after all. Dory Miller is not finished, though. The jets are still approaching, but he has managed to save his captain. The weapons remain silent, and they continue to strafe and slaughter his shipmates. He gazes up at the blazing sky. He examines the gunners who have died. He glances at the 2 Browning anti-aircraft machine guns of the .50 caliber that are silently waiting on the deck. He is not allowed to handle this weapon. He's never been taught to operate this machine. A role. He was deemed unfit to execute by his experts. He examines the firearm. He bolts. He dashes past the gunners who are dead. He gets behind the twin-mounted by jumping over twisted steel. .50 caliber Browning machine guns are a sophisticated, belt-fed, air-cooled armament system that weighs more than 130 pounds and can fire 800 rounds per minute. A weapon that had never been taught to him. He's not a shooter. He doesn't know how to load it. He doesn't know how to aim it. All he knows is that it must burn. Ensign Fred White, a young officer, is in the vicinity. Miller is visible to him. He sees no cook. He notices a capable pair of hands. Is it possible to fire that thing? Over the clamor, White yells. Miller is truthful. "No, sir. However, I am capable of learning. I'll load it White yells in response. You set it on fire. The expert system fails at this point. There are no longer any rules. The policy is in disarray. Cooks and gunners are no longer employed. Only the live and the dead exist. The ammunition belts are successfully fed into the guns by White and another sailor. Miller holds on to the handles of the spade. The USS West Virginia fires back for the first time when he pulls the trigger. Yamamoto's unfeasible risk. The attack on Pearl Harbor has ended. The Japanese have won in under 90 minutes. It is the biggest and most catastrophic naval triumph in contemporary history. There are 2,433 American fatalities. 1,178 people are injured. All 7 of the battleships in Battleship Row are among the 18 ships that are sunk or severely damaged. The sleeping giant, the U.S. Pacific Fleet, has been beheaded in its bed. Washington specialists are stunned. The Pearl Harbor experts are in ruins. The strategy, the method, and the professional consensus that deem Pearl Harbor secure have all failed miserably. In the midst of this disastrous failure and this national nightmare, a new legend, the tale of the cook who manned a gun, is beginning to take shape. Reports start to come in during the hectic days following the strike as the smoke clears and the Navy attempts to comprehend what had transpired. The officers and sailors who survived the West Virginia are all recounting the same unbelievable tale, that of Dory Miller. They discuss how he was able to save the captain. They discuss how he shot a .50 caliber machine gun while working as an untrained mess attendant. They discuss the Japanese aircraft he shot down. How many? There are a lot of reports. 2, according to some. Some swear 4. As many as 6 were claimed by some. The precise amount will never be known to us. It was hard to verify due to the commotion of that morning. The smoke, the fire, and the 1,600 rounds per minute. However, Dory Miller operated the gun with remarkable efficiency and is credited with shooting down at least 2 and possibly as many as 6 enemy aircraft. According to the U.S. Navy's official after-action report, which was later published in black and white. To be clear, a single plane is a miracle. It would be fortunate for skilled gunners to strike one on a good day with a sturdy platform. It is not just unlikely, but impossible for a cook aboard a sinking ship under continuous fire to hit any. Additionally, Miller was told he was only qualified to serve coffee by the U.S. Navy, which now faced a serious political and public relations issue. How do you handle someone who wasn't meant to be a hero? When the man your entire system was built to disregard is your greatest hero from your greatest loss, how do you respond? The experts, the admirals, and the Navy had to make a decision. This was a mental and emotional war. America was humiliated, defeated, and broken. After a day of complete catastrophe, the public was in dire need of a hero and one positive narrative. The Navy also possessed one. The issue? He was black in a racist, segregated America during the war. Dory Miller's story was a bombshell, not just a tale. The political and military elite of 1941 maintained that it was impossible and unacceptable to inform the American people that a black guy who worked as a chef was the hero of Pearl Harbor. The system would be destroyed. The social order would be upended. They said that it would ruin the white troops' morale. Thus, a choice was taken by the specialists. The story was suppressed by the same experts who deemed Pearl Harbor safe. They made the decision to erase Dory Miller. An unidentified sailor, a Negro messman, was commended in the early accounts for his gallantry, but his identity was kept a secret. The Navy declined to identify him for months. The heroes were commended. They made a list of the deceased. However, the man who truly retaliated, Dory Miller, was removed. He was a hero who was forbidden. The experts couldn't handle his act because it was too crazy. They believed they could steer the story. They believed they could simply go on. The strength of the truth had not been taken into consideration. The black press was undoubtedly not taken into consideration. The account of an unidentified Negro hero reached the Pittsburgh Courier, a black community newspaper. Frank Bolden, a reporter they dispatched, started investigating. He started by posing the one query that the Navy refused to respond to. What is his name? No. Although the Navy's expert system had withstood the Japanese torpedoes, an unstoppable force was about to strike it. It was powerless against a legendary high school dropout and an impending tempest from the press. The Pittsburgh Courier was more than a newspaper. The expert consensus of the U.S. Navy was directly targeted by this weapon. The Navy refused to budge. They declined to comment. The reports were categorized. They wished for the tale to end. However, Percival L. Prattis, the Courier's executive editor, refused to let it go. The NAACP teamed up with them. Walter White, the executive secretary of the NAACP, who could pass for white and had utilized it to look into lynchings in the South, now focused all of his investigative efforts on the U.S. Navy. Press, civil rights leaders, and senators all increased their pressure. The tale of the anonymous African-American hero was turning into a national scandal. Washington specialists had a war to wage. They had no time for a social issue. However, the story was now too enormous to ignore. Built on a century of prejudice, the Navy's expert system failed. The Japanese torpedoes had not killed it. The reality would not allow it to endure. 3 months after the attack, on March 14, 1942, the Navy ultimately submitted. The name was made public: Doris Dory Miller, third-class mess attendant. The narrative took off. Dory Miller became a folk hero and legend in the black community. He was an actual John Henry, an incredibly strong man who had battled the machine. He was the one who demonstrated that they were capable of fighting as well as serving. Now confronted with a tidal wave of negative publicity, the Navy had to make another, even more difficult choice. The politicians and specialists in Washington had failed. The subject matter specialists assumed control. The man who had taken over as the Pacific Fleet's new commander-in-chief, Admiral Chester Nimitz, was not a politician. As a warrior, he was able to recognize heroes. Nimitz conducted a ceremony on the flight deck of the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise on May 27, 1942. The Enterprise was just days away from embarking into the Battle of Midway, the most important naval conflict in history. So this was more than simply a formal event. The ship was a hive of activity. They were briefing the pilots. They were tuning engines. The actual war was on the verge of collapse. And Admiral Nimitz halted the war in the midst of this high-stakes pre-battle stress. Dory Miller, the mess attendant, was summoned forward. The media was invited. The cameras were in motion. This was the expert surrender of the Navy. The most powerful admiral in the Pacific, Nimitz, personally put the Navy Cross on Miller's chest while standing in front of the 22-year-old cook. Let's define the Navy Cross precisely. In the U.S. Navy, it is the second highest award for valor, behind the Medal of Honor. It is awarded for exceptional valor in battle. On that day, the commander-in-chief himself presented a cook, a black man, with the first Navy Cross for valor in World War II, for distinguished devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and disregard for his own personal safety, the citation stated. Admiral Nimitz, a guy familiar with the system, had destroyed it in an instant. He had deemed the banned conduct to be an act of remarkable valor, both formally and publicly. However, the tale doesn't stop there. The most well-known black man in America at the time was Dory Miller. He was a celebrity. The Washington specialists who had attempted to bury him now recognized his worth. He was removed from his Marine duties. He was returned to the United States and placed on a tour as a war bond. This was yet another instance of the Navy's professional consensus in action. Black American morale was at an all-time low, which presented a challenge. Why should we fight for a nation that treats us like second-class citizens? They questioned. Why should we purchase bonds for a navy that will only allow us to serve as valets? Dory Miller was the ideal icon for the experts. He was featured on posters. New York, Chicago, and his hometown of Waco, Texas, were among the cities where he was paraded. In his remarks, he urged African Americans to purchase war bonds and join the Navy, which still only allowed them to serve as cooks. The awful irony was this. Despite being a mess attendant, Dory Miller was a national hero and a recipient of the Navy Cross. He received a medal from the experts, but his work description remained unchanged. In a cage, he was a hero. He was a warrior compelled to serve as a symbol once more. However, the specialists could never undo what his unlawful act had done. The Navy eventually opened up other grades in 1942 as a result of the Dory Miller effect and intense public pressure he had generated. Black sailors were given the opportunity to train as radiomen, mechanics, and gunners for the first time. Not only had Cook Dory Miller fired a gun, but he had also fired the bullet that marked the beginning of the U.S. Navy's transition away from segregation. That was his real, unachievable legacy. Miller detested the tour of war bonds. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a representation. He worked as a sailor. He was a fighter. His shipmates and companions were still engaged in combat. He insisted to be sent back to sea to fight again. The experts ultimately came to a consensus in 1943. His symbolic significance was diminishing. Fighters were needed for the war. He was transferred aboard the USS Liscum Bay, a modest escort carrier rather than a powerful battleship. The Pacific's workhorses were these vessels. They were quick, little, and, as it happened, extremely vulnerable. They were constructed on the hulls of cargo ships. Unlike battleships, they lacked armor. They were essentially bomb-carrying floating fuel tanks. Among the new staff, Dory Miller was already well known. He had received a promotion. He was now a third-class cook. The magazine had his battle station. He was once again the man who had been attempting to fulfill his role at Pearl Harbor by passing ammunition to the gunners. The Liscum Bay was in the Gilbert Islands in November 1943, providing support for the ruthless invasion of Tarawa. Operation Galvanic was this. The purpose of the Liscum Bay was to give the Marines who were dying on the beaches air protection. It was a dangerous, high-stakes mission. The ship was in a task group with destroyers all around. They were safe and protected, according to the expert consensus, but the experts had once again neglected to take the enemy into consideration. On Thanksgiving Day, November 24, 1943, around 4:30 a.m., it was completely dark. The ocean was serene. The I-175, a lone Japanese submarine, was on the search. The I-175 was a cutting-edge Navy submarine. Tadashi Inada, its commander, was a skilled and patient assassin. He had been pursuing the American task force for hours. He managed to break through the destroyer screen, an unthinkable feat, and was now inside the warship's protective ring. Raising his periscope, he spied an ideal target, the USS Liscum Bay, an aircraft carrier silhouetted against the pre-dawn light. There was not a single torpedo fired by Commander Inada. He launched 4 Type 95 torpedoes in a spread. Leaping from their tubes, the lethal oxygen-fueled long-lance versions rushed for the carrier in silence and without consciousness. The general quarters klaxon on board the Liscum Bay had just sounded, not because of the torpedoes, but because the dawn patrol was scheduled for 5:55 m on the flight deck. Planes were being armed. They were moving bombs. They were flowing fuel lines. The ship was a 10,000-ton bomb at that precise moment. With explosives all around him, Dory Miller was at his post in the magazine deep within the ship. A lookout on the battleship USS New Mexico noticed a flicker, a shadow in the sea, at 5:13 a.m. "Torpedo wake!" he cried, although it was for the Liscombe, not his ship. One of the 4 torpedoes struck the Liscombe's starboard side, directly behind the engine room. The aircraft bomb magazine where Dory Miller worked was a spot where survival was nearly impossible. Once more, the unthinkable occurred. The Liscombe melted rather than sinking. There was not enough time for the ship to burn. In a single devastating, blinding explosion, the entire 10,000-ton ship exploded. 1,000 feet into the air, a column of steel, smoke, and fire was launched. Men aboard ships kilometers away were knocked off their feet by the explosion's extreme violence. Men and debris rained down. Admiral Samuel McCain, the task force commander of the USS New Mexico, a battleship 5,000 yards away, was shook so violently that he believed his ship had been struck. There was nothing but a hole in the water when the smoke cleared. There was no longer a Liscombe. It was blown into a million bits. The final smoldering piece of the stern vanished under the waves after 23 minutes. In a moment, 644 sailors were lost, including Dory Miller, the ship's heavyweight boxing champion and Pearl Harbor hero, who was barely fit to serve coffee. In action, he was killed. His body was never located. The cook could no longer be erased by the experts, admirals, and historians who had to write the U.S. Navy's history. His illegal deed was now irrevocably etched in history. The U.S. Navy commissioned a brand new 4,100-ton frigate in 1973. It may have been named after any expert or admiral. Rather, they called it the USS Miller, a warship named for the guy who was formerly prohibited from handling a firearm at all. At last, the unanimity among experts shattered altogether. The Wasp-class amphibious assault ship, USS Dory Miller, was put into service by the Navy in 2001. The Navy made the most unthinkable announcement in 2020. The USS Dory Miller, a $13 billion nuclear-powered supercarrier, would be the next Gerald R. Ford class, the most potent, sophisticated, and costly ship in human history. This is the first supercarrier ever named after an enlisted sailor, the first to bear a black American's name. The cook from our previous story, Thomas Lawson, came up with a crazy solution to an impractical engineering challenge. 4,200 guys were saved by him. Dory Miller committed a crime. He resolved a human issue rather than an engineering one. He disproved the expert consensus, both nationally and internationally. He demonstrated that bravery is independent of status. Your training is irrelevant to it. It also doesn't give a damn about the hue of your skin. Sometimes, a single person seeing what the experts missed and having the guts to do the one thing everyone else said was forbidden is what makes the difference between success and failure, not new technology. This is not merely a World War II tale. The narrative revolves around questioning the system. Which of Dory Miller's actions, manning the gun or circumventing the system that attempted to stop him, was the more difficult? Let us know in the comments. Your thoughts are vital to this channel. Please hit the like button if you liked this bit of buried history. To ensure you never miss an upload, subscribe and ring the bell for more bad news that the experts attempted to hide. We will reveal the ghost army that deceived Hitler in broad daylight in our upcoming film.